All right, Rabbi say good morning. Good morning. Sorry for the technical delay. Good morning. A good tavach. A great zchus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to begin another week of limud together. We begin with our sponsorships. To thank all of those who sponsors today's shir. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Teves. Mrs. Selma Woolf, for dedicating all the Shiurim and Droshos this month with immense gratitude for the refuos from Hashem and the merit of a refuah sheleima for all of those in need and the zchus of our brave soldiers and the zchus of the return of our hostages. Leah Sol, as a zchus for refuah sheleima for her daughter Ilana bas Esther, for the safety of our soldiers and the safe return of all of the hostages to their families. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Brocha, Baruch and Brocha Rivkin, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Rabbi Rivkin, Harav Ruvain ben Tzvi, Zichrono Livracha. We dedicate our learning as well to the two precious soldiers who were killed, Al Kiddush Hashem, over the course of Shabbos, Sergeant Konstantin Sushko and Captain Harel Itach. And of course, we dedicate all of Maseches Bava Le'iloi Nishmas, Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush, Hashem Yikom Damo, one of the brave police officers in Sderot, who through his heroic actions was able to save the lives of mamish thousands of people. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, his Neshama will have an aliya. And, sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Where is our tech team? Where is the tech team? Where is the tech team? Thank you, Sammy. Thank you. In the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, Mirat Hashem, his Neshama shall have an aliya, and his family in Neshama should be a week of Besoros Tovos to Klal Yisrael. All right, with that, thank you, Sammy. With that, let us begin. So we'll say, so today's daf is Nun Tes 59, and we're actually picking up at the top of Nun Tes, kind of smack in the middle of a brisa over there. So the brisa says as follows: Achal achla smadar. So also remember again, the topic that we're dealing with over here is how we evaluate damages. So essentially, we have three different models. Model number one is to go ahead and just look at the produce independently. How much is this produce worth on the open market? Model number two is to go ahead and look at how much the land was worth with the produce, right, before the damage occurred, and ultimately, again, how much the land is worth without the produce after the damage occurred. Model number three, which is introduced in last daf, is we don't look at simply the size of the land as it is, but rather we look at a parcel of land like this times 60. In other words, in a ratio of 60 times of a larger parcel, how much would this loss of produce be worth? And we go ahead and we evaluate it like that. There are three different models, and we're continuing with that today. So if a person goes ahead and consumes smadar produce, what's smadar? Rashi says over here, anovim dakin bahas chalasan li'achar sheparchu miyad. So I guess the English word for this would be like budding grapes. Meaning what? That they're in a very early state of maturation, right after they begin to blossom. So what happens if you consume produce in this early state of maturation? Rabbi Shmuel says, "Roin osan ki Elohein anovim omdos libatzer." Rabbi Shmuel says, we view them as if they are fully matured grapes. So Rabbi said, this is actually a fascinating idea. So Rabbi Shmuel highlighting this concept that when we assess damages, we don't simply assess damages based on what the produce is now, but we also look at what the produce is going to become. Remember again, Rabbi says, it's a fascinating yisod. When I go into Reuven's property and I eat his grapes, I damage his grapes. So while it's true that I may be damaging produce that is smadar, that is in this early state of maturation now, had that been left to mature, ultimately it would have become a beautiful ripened cluster of grapes. So Rabbi Yeshua says, when assessing damages, we don't look at the smadar cluster, rather we look at what is ultimately going to mature into. The Chacham say, the Chachamim omrim, roin kama haisi yafa, the kama hi yafa. The Chachamim take a simpler approach, I will say. The Chachamim say, no, that's not how it works. We don't assess produce independently. We assess produce or assess the damage based on the land. So for example, we look at what the parcel of land with the produce was worth before the produce was destroyed or consumed, and then we look at what the value is after the produce was consumed or destroyed, and that difference, that's damages. That's damages. That's the Chachamim. Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Shimon is going to qualify the Chacham. He says, Mishra Rabbi Shimon, when is that so? Bizman sha'achla lulave gifanim v'yechure te'enim. So when is that so? That's ultimately when, look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, B'nei agav karka. When is it true, like the Chachamim said, that we assess damages with the produce attached to the karka. In other words, that we look at what the karka, the land, was worth with intact produce. We look at what the karka was worth with consumed or destroyed produce, and that difference is damages. When is that so? When the person, by the way, I also want to point out, in these cases, it is irrelevant who or what is doing the damage. In other words, so whether this is a person doing damage, whether this is a person's animal doing damage, doesn't make a difference. So when is this true? This is true ultimately, again, when the animal or the person is consuming shoots, like the vine. Aval ochla pagim. But ultimately, again, if, let's say pagim, pagim literally means like half-ripened dates. Ava achlan pagim obosar roen osan ki'ilu anavim omdos li batzar. This is a very interesting qualification over here. So over here, the Rabbi Shmuel is saying, when do we assess produce together with the land? That's only if the produce was consumed in the very early maturation state, the consuming shoots as well. But if we're talking about further developed fruit, either again the status of pagim, which is half ripened, or bosar, which is fully ripened, then ultimately again we assess the value of produce on its own. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, "Ava achla pagim b'teina obosar ba'anavim shin kapua lavan v'avikeperos kimur roan osan." So a very interesting distinction. So Gemara says, "V'katani mihas," but never. So what are we stating over here? V'chachamim omrim roan osa kama haisiyafa v'kama hiyafa v'lo katani b'shishim. That will say, for our purposes, what the Gemara is trying to highlight over here is that the Chachamim reject this notion of shishim. In other words, even the Chachamim who say that we assess the value of produce together with the land. So again, I will say one more time. The Chachamim's formula for damage assessment is a very simple one. We look at the value of the land before damage. Now remember, again, I will say value of land includes two things. What are the two things? Number one, right, the land. And number two, the produce attached to it. So we look at the value of the land, which encompasses both of those values, and then after the damage, we look at the value of the land. And ultimately, the difference between those two values, that's damages. That's damages. But what don't the Chachamim take into account? This whole shishim thing. Right? They don't require you to look at, to imagine if this parcel was 60 times larger, then what would damage look like? They reject that notion. So I will say now, here's the issue. The Chacham beforehand accepted this concept of shishim. So what do you have to say? It must be that when the Chachamim talk about valuing the produce with the land, they're not just talking about stand the parcel of land as it is. Rather, they're looking at it at 60 times larger and assessing damages like that. Rabbi Yosef Lili, Rabbi Shmuel Amru Davar Echad. So now again, this is interesting. Rabbi says Rabbi Yosef Lili, Rabbi Shmuel, both really they highlight the same concept. Rabbi Yosef Lili Hada Amran. So I will say Rabbi Yosef Lili we spoke about before. Rabbi Yosef Lili was mentioned at the end of Nunches Amud Beis. Rabbi Shmuel says as follows: Rabbi Shmuel Tisanya, Meitav Sadeo Meitav Karma Yishalim. So the pasuk says that when you do damage, or specifically again, this is talking about over here, Kiyaver ish sada o kerem b'shilach es beiro. So again, we're talking about over here damage that Reuven does to Shimon. So what's the halacha? Meitav sadeo meitav karmo yishalem. You have to go ahead and pay from the best of your field and the best of your vineyard. So we've seen this before many times. The shaila, of course, is who's best? Who's best? So Meitav Sadeo Shal Nizak, Meitav Karma Shal Nizak, Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel holds that ultimately, you're going to say, we value damages based on the best property of the damaged party, of the Nizak. So we look at what the best property of the Nizak is, and ultimately, again, that's how we assess damages. Rabbi Kiva says, no, Lo Baha Kosav Ela Ligbos Lenizakin Min Ha'idis, the Kavachomer Lehekdish. Rabbi Kiva holds that that's not what the pasuk is going to teach me. The pasuk is actually coming to teach me that Allah you take from idis, from the best property. But I will say implicit to Rabbi Akiva's statement is whose best property? Whose best property? The mazik, the damager's best property. And he learns that ultimately again from a kavachomer to idis. We'll say take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Nizakim min idis osa shuma sheshamu bezdin mea omasayim. Yigba karka b'meo masayim mina idis shebenechasav. Fine. So we'll say, okay, fine. You want to call the hektish. V'lo tema Now the Gemara says, here's what's interesting. So the Gemara is aligning the position that Rabbi Shmuel just mentioned over here with the position that Rabbi Yossi Haglili mentioned on the bottom of Amud Beis. For lo temba, and ultimately again, don't think for a second that Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Idi bar Avin. Dam Rabbi Idi bar Avin, kigon sha'ach la aruga bein ha'arugos. So what Rabbi Idi bar Avin says, when do we go ahead and make the damager payment at Idis? That's only when the damager's animal ate a row of produce from amongst the damaged party's field. And we're not sure. Did he consume a row of produce that was high level produce, high quality produce, or lower quality produce? The Amar Kum Shalom Shmeina B'meitov. In that case, we tell the damager, pay of Idis, pay of this property. Remember, we reject that concept. Why do we reject that concept? My taima. Remember again, we had this discussion. So in general, again, we had it in the context of machlokes in zchus and the Rabbanon. Right? Zchus holds maman hamutal b'safek cholkin, and the Rabbanon say that anytime you have maman hamutal b'safek, anytime you have a doubtful claim, hamotzi mechaber alav haraya. The burden of proof rests upon the person who ultimately wants to extract it. So same thing over here. The Rabbanon would reject the position of Ravidi, because Rabbi Idi is saying again, if Reuven's animal went into Shimon's field and went ahead and damaged a row of produce, but we're not sure, was it superior produce, was it inferior produce? Rabbi Idi says, we make the damager pay superior produce. We would reject that concept, because we would say, no, we'll make you pay inferior produce. And damaged party, if you want to extract more money, the burden of proof is ultimately upon you. Ella, the meitev de lekame. Rather, I will say, so what is it that we make? What is it that we make ultimately, again, the damaged party pay? But meitev de lekame, again, assuming that halacha l'maisa, right, that we could, I'm sorry, let me say it differently. When we go ahead and we say b'meitav, so meitav means from the best of the damager's party, from the best of the damaged parties. Okay, let's take a step back here. Right, machlokes, meitav kama yishalim. Right, the pasuk says you have to pay from the best of your property. We have a fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Right, Rabbi Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa, meitav sadeu shel nizak, best of the property of the nizak. Rabbi Akiva ultimately holds that is coming to teach me ultimately again mina idis. So the Gemara says ella. Now that's good. Ella b'meitav dilakame. I will say rather again halacha l'maisa. We go ahead and we make the damager pay from the best of the property that is in front of him. Umaynihu. And I will say, how do we assess that? Kihech desolik. Ultimately again from that which is going to emerge from this property at the time of the harvest. Rashi says, Kihech desolik b'mosa katzir. So what you see from here is something very interesting. When Rabbi Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa you have to pay from the nizak's property, from the best of the nizak's property. So I say, how do we assess the best? So do you assess the best on what is now, or do you assess the best on what is going to be? So for example, let's say right now all the damaged properties, it's early in the agricultural season. So therefore again, everything is underdeveloped. So that's one way of assessment. Or do we wait a couple of months, or however long the agricultural season is, wait a couple of months, a couple of weeks, and you're going to have fully developed produce. So Bishmuel holds that when assessing damage, when assessing the idis, ultimately of the damaged party, we don't simply look at what the produce is now, but rather we look at what the produce will be at the time of harvest, like the position of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Incredible. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. Amar Mar. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. Amar Shimon Rabbi Shimon. When is this so? I will say now. When is what so? When is it so that we assess damages by going ahead and looking at the crops as part of the land? Sha'akla. That's only when the animal ultimately again consumed shoots, right? Shoots of grapevine, shoots of fig trees. Hasmadar, but I will say if it's a more advanced, now smadar is still an early stage, a budding stage. But if it's smadar, roan osan kilo amnavim omdos libatzer, we view it as if it's produce that is ready to be harvested. Okay, Amos Sefer, look at the end of the brayso. Achla pagim od bosar. If you went ahead and you consumed the fruit, there was pagim, which is half ripened, or bosar, pretty much ready, fully ripened. Hu deroan osa kilo anavim omdos libatzer. We view the produce as if it was ready to be harvested. Hasmadar, but you can infer from that that if the animal or the person consumed or destroyed the produce at an earlier state, roin kama hi yafa, v'kama haisi yafa. Ultimately, again, about say we assess it based on the land. In other words, how much was the land worth before the damage? How much was the land worth after the damage? Amar Avina kroch vatani. Avina says really what you have to do. You have to take the Reish and the Seifa, bind them to literally kroch vatani, put them together and teach it as one kind of uniform teaching. How so? Here we go. So the Gemara says, when is this so? Bisman sha'achla v'gefana v'yichurei te'enim. So I'll say ultimately again. So when is this so? It's when you go ahead and the animal or the person is going ahead and eating the shoots. Aval achla smadar pagin obosar. But if the person or the animal consumed, again, abosai, the fruit in any level of maturation. In any level of maturation. Smadar, early budding state. Pagin, half ripened. Bosar, pretty much ripened. Rowan osan ki'ilu anavim omdos libatzar. Ultimately, again, we view it as if it's produce that is ready to be harvested, and therefore, ultimately, again, we value it on its own. Ihachi, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda, Hainu Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi say, if that's the case, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda and Rabbi Yoshua are saying the exact same thing. Ika ben Rabbi say, so what's the practical difference between them? Kachash gufna v'lo mesaymi. So Rabbi say, this is interesting. So what the Gemara wants to suggest is, it sounds like over here, it sounds like that now halacha l'maisa, we're going ahead and kind of aligning all of the positions. That it seems to be that halacha l'maisa, when do we go ahead? We're making a distinction between damage done to the shoots, which is really essentially like pre-maturation state, versus damage done to the fruit once it's begun to mature. And what we're doing together is grouping together all of the different states of maturation, smadar, pagim, and bosar, and ultimately, again, grouping them together for damages purposes as well. If that's the case, the Gemara says, then effectively, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda and Rabbi Yeshua are saying the same thing. I will say, by the way, we're going to pull this all together. Don't worry. We're going to pull this all together in just a little bit and kind of come to a halachic conclusion as well. But the point of the Gemara, we're right now working through it. Rabbi Shimon Yehuda and Rabbi Yeshua are saying the same thing. So we'll say, so what's the distinction between their shitos? The distinction would be kachash kufna. And we'll say, this is interesting. When fruit matures on the vine, right there on the tree, so every crop that the tree or the vine produces, obviously weakens the vine or the tree, right? Because you're sapping some of the nutrients. So here's something interesting. When you go ahead and you damage produce, and therefore through that damage prevent the vine or the tree from bringing the produce to complete fruition, you're actually saving the farmer some money. I know it sounds strange. Only Jews could come up with calculations like this, right? I did you a favor. In other words, but there is an element of that because, for example, again, let's say, for example, every time the vine brings the grapes to complete maturation, let's say the vine, the strength of the vine is diminished by 10%, just for argument's sake. So now, if I walk into Reuben's field and I destroy some of the crop, right? So l'maisek, and as much as I've caused them a loss in the loss of the crop, I've also saved 10% of the future vitality of the vine. So the Gemara says, now what's the shaila? The shaila is, do we take that into account and use that quote-unquote savings to offset the damages? That's the machlokes, and the Gemara wants to suggest that'll be the machlokes. That's the point of contention between Rabbi Shimon Yehuda and Rabbi Yoshua. But interesting enough, the Gemara says, "V'lo mesaymi," we don't know who holds what. In other words, we don't know who holds that you offset damages by that amount, and who holds you don't offset damages by that amount. Says the Gemara, Abaye says that's not true. Amar mesaymi u'mesaymi. We know exactly who holds what. I will say, watch this. This is fascinating. So, I will say, first wide line, Nun Tasamadal 59a. Man Tana Dechayish Lekachash Gufna. We'll say, who is the Tana who holds that we do include the quote unquote savings? And I will say, Chayish Lekachash Gufna means in general, who is the Tana who assesses the value, the diminished value of the vine every time it produces a crop? Rabbi Shimon Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon, the sign boss is incredible. So Rabbi Shimon Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Shimon Menasya, Ones inu mishalim esatzar. So boss, this is an interesting statement. So if a man violates a woman, So ultimately, again, he has to pay her all the different damages, but he doesn't have to pay her tsar, pain and suffering. So the Gemara says, why? She's a basula, right? There's pain. There may be pain involved in the first act of bia. So he doesn't have to pay her. The violator doesn't have to pay her the tsar. Why? Because ultimately, again, she's going to suffer that tsar, so to speak. She would have suffered that anyway with the first act of relations with her husband. The Gemara says, that's not true. Amrulo, eino domen niveles beratzon leniveles baones. How can you say that? How can you say that? That's simply not true, right? The tsar involved in a consensual act. In other words, there may be some pain and discomfort in that first act, but in a doma, the pain and discomfort when it's consensual, versus again the pain and suffering when it's not. So Amar Abaye says, Hanitani, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda Amr Davar Echad. Shabbos says, so here's what the Gemara is going. Look at Rashi just a moment. Why is the Gemara bringing this up? Shesofa litztar alma minachin minat tashlumin kafi mashe sida lechachish. Shabbos say the reason why the Gemara was bringing that up because that was a model. That was a model where we say if something is going to happen anyway, in the future, so we could go ahead and lower present damages based on a reality that would unfold later on. So there's this havamina. Again, I want to point out that we rejected, but this havamina that when a woman is violated, she's entitled to all these buckets of payments, right? There's boshes, there's sad, all the different things. Then Imar wants to suggest, well, maybe since one day anyway, were she to marry, she would go ahead and suffer, so to speak, that tsar or encounter that tsar, so maybe we can knock that off the current payment. Now again, we reject that havamina, but the concept has interesting applications for us. Because now I walk into Reuven's field, I go ahead and I damage his produce. So let's say, again, I both say, he's got smadar produce and I consume it, or I just destroy it. So now again, I'm going to be chayiv for damages. How we're assessing those damages is still not clear, but maybe, I should say, Reuven, listen, I saved you because, again, had those grapes grown to full maturation, and obviously in the agricultural world, they must know these things. In other words, there's a life for vines, right? A vine, I'm sure, is good for X number of harvests. So now again, I destroyed your produce when it was smadar. Now at the end of the day, I owe you money, but Lamaisa, I also extended the life of your vine. So therefore, again, somehow that needs to be offset a little bit. So the Gemara is just pointing out, you see this model exists. Amar Abaye says, Hanitani, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda, Amar Davar Echad. So these Tanaim, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda said the same thing. Listen to this. What says this? Davar Echad. Rabbi Shimon Yehuda, Hadamar. Suppose Rabbi Shimon Yehuda was just what we mentioned before. Rabbi Shimon Yehuda was the one who wanted to say that the woman who's violated shouldn't get tsar, since she's ultimately going to go ahead and receive and encounter that pain later on. Again, we'll say we rejected, but that's the havamina. So, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda says it the following time. Listen to this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Yehuda the Amran, Hani Tani Mahi. This is fascinating. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Nechi Chaya, Ben Azai Amr Nechi Mizonos. So we'll say, listen to this. Here's the case. Reuven and Shimon are fighting. And what happens? They're both saying, Reuven accidentally strikes a pregnant woman and she miscarries. We spent a lot of time in this case. She miscarries. So what's the halacha? In addition to all of the other damages that Reuven has to pay to this woman, there's also something called Dmei Volados, right? The value of the pregnancy. Shabbos said, listen to this. This is fascinating. Rabbi Yossi says, you have to pay the value of the pregnancy, but you're also permitted to offset those damages by other amounts. For example, the amount of a midwife. Had the woman gone full term and delivered her baby, her husband would have paid for a midwife. Well, now, unfortunately, she miscarried, but they don't have to pay for the midwife. That's one opinion. Other opinion says, Ben Azai says, Nechim Zonos, a pregnant woman eats more. And so again, now that she's no longer pregnant, there's, I want to point out, it sounds strange, right? It sounds strange, like you have these conversations over here about personal suffering, right? Like even like the Rabbi Shimon Yehuda, the notion that we're equating a woman who's violated with a woman who has a consensual act with her husband for the first time, or over here, again, a woman miscarried, but you're saving on the midwife, right? Or you're saving on the extra food. So I will say. So remember again, there's a phrase that's often very helpful in Gemaras like this, which is the phrase of halacha yevesha. Halacha yevesha just means, we'll say, so sometimes in order to fully create a comprehensive legal system, you have to be able to look at legal realities devoid of emotion, right? You have to be able to just look at this just as a legal construct. That's how legal systems are made. Because now, again, part of the beauty of our legal system is laced with a very healthy dose of empathy, of achrayus, of all of these things. But sometimes, especially in tort law, right, in the laws of damages, so you have to be able to look at things a bit dispassionately. So there's a certain discomfort. I don't know. At least I feel like a certain discomfort with these cases, especially when you're talking about such traumatic events and such human suffering. But never mistake the matter-of-fact nature of these discussions for a lack of empathy for the other in halacha. It's just, again, right now what we are looking at is the creation of a legal framework. And that legal framework requires us to divorce. I told you this, Maisa, right? I told you this, Maisa, when I was first married. I told you this one before. I'll tell it again. It's good. When I was first married, so I was learning in Kola. We're learning Maseches Nida. So we were a young couple. We had one car. So my wife, on Sundays, used to pick me up after morning Seder. So after mincha time, so I was in the car, and we were newlyweds. Like that stage when you only talk Torah, so beautiful, whatever. So I was like, so what did you learn? So I told her, it was a great subject. We're doing like hamapeles kimin sandal. A woman miscarries something, it looks like a sandal. Is it this? Is it that? I'm saying it, and literally, my wife turns white. She was like, but what about the woman? Again, I'm getting this whole drisha v'chakira about this whole thing like this, getting all excited. Hey, and it happens to be that's the gadlus of women as well, which is just a fascinating. Everything is laced with profound empathy, profound emotion. But it was a good lesson how sometimes even with these gemaras, when you learn a gemara like this, you pause, and you say, what? The gemara is talking about a case of a woman who was violated, Rahman al-Islam, and now we're living in times where Jewish women being violated, Rahman al-Islam, is not like a theoretical case. Not like a theoretical case. So it's just always important, just for our own sense of empathy, right? A woman is injured and miscarries, just for our own sense of empathy. Okay, we'll do the halacha yevesha, but you pause for a moment just to reflect that we should not allow these types of events to occur to us anymore. But lamaisa, just to make sure that when we hear about these things, when we think about these things, that it stirs up within us a profound sense of empathy and a profound sense of avas Yisrael and achrayus Yisrael. So an event, the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, so Reuven goes ahead and injures the woman. She miscarries. So now again, in addition to all the other damages, there's dmei valados. He has to pay again the value of the miscarriage. So I will say, take a look at Rashi. So Rashi says, okay, but he should be able to go ahead and subtract the amount that the husband would have paid for the midwife. Rashi says, Nechi chaya b'dmei valados kamari demenakelo ma shabal osilitin b'schar hamiyaledes v'nezak ha'isha shinuzuka mistares achshav yosem mishiyesh lachaya harehi. So yes, Rashi essentially saying, whatever it would have been $150 for the doula, for the midwife. Okay, so now you have to pay your damages, but lamaisa, now husband, you don't have to pay for the midwife. Or Ben Azai says, Nechi mizonos. Go ahead and detract mizonos. Look at Rashi. Nechi mizonos. Shutzarech lahosif al mizonos ishto b'mei kishuyah v'hashta in kishui. Alma menachin mashu asid lahotzi. So again, what do you see from here? You see from here that when assessing present damages, we look at, on one hand, what damages saved, so to speak, the damaged party. I'll just point out, by the way, just understand, mitzad hashkafa, what a profound hashkafic yisod this is. That what does Yiddishkeit tell us? Yiddishkeit says that even when you suffer a setback, look for the positive. Even when something terrible occurs, even in terrible circumstances, there is always something positive that emerges. So again, here they're talking from a financial perspective. You saved money on the midwife. You saved money on the mizonos. That's a consolation. Anyone? But Lamaisa, it's a mindset. It's a mindset that is not just true in the laws of damages, but it's true in life as well. Every single terrible event, and every single difficult event, and every single setback in life always opens the door for something positive. Always paves the way for something. The positive thing that comes out doesn't necessarily take away the pain of the difficult event. But it's important to understand that sometimes things happen to us in life and we feel like that they're only leading us to descend into darkness. But there's nothing further from the truth. The Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Man damar nechi chaya kol shken gai mizonos, nechi mizonos. Shabbos says, so the one who says you could subtract the amount for the midwife would certainly agree that you could subtract the amount for the mizonos. Uman damar nechi mizonos, listen to this, it's incredible. But the one who says you could subtract the amount for the mizonos, aval nechi chaya lo. Maybe you can't subtract the amount for that you would have paid for the midwife. Why? Because the husband could say, Isasa didi pekichayi follow me baya. The husband could say, my wife, she wouldn't need a midwife. So in other words, Rabbi was saying, mizonos, that a pregnant woman eats more, everyone agrees. I feel like someone's going to isolate that sound bite and somehow use that against me at some point, right? So a pregnant woman eats more, everyone agrees, but Lamaisa, not every woman needs a doula, not every woman needs a midwife. So ultimately the husband could say that, Halacha Lamaisa, again, my wife would be able to deliver on her own, and ultimately, again, she would not need anyone else to assist. And I said, just understand the profundity of reading this line on Sunday, the first day of the week of Parsha Shmos. So remember again, Paro calls in Shifra and Puah, and he says to them, go ahead and kill the baby boys. And what does she say? What did the midwife say? The Jewish women, they're like animals. What do you mean Jewish women like animals? So Rashi HaKadosh points out, they don't require midwives. They birth the babies on, 7.5 year cycle. 7.5 year cycle. And how does that Gemara come out? On the Sunday of Parsha Shmos. Right? Lo kinasha mitzvos ivrios heina. The Jewish women are not like the women of the world. That is a profound statement, a true statement on every single level. Every single level. Right? But Lamaisa over here, the Gemara says they don't necessarily need midwives. They're able to go ahead and birth the children on their own. So therefore, again, I will say, the opinion that says that Halacha Lamaisa, you could subtract mizonos, wouldn't necessarily agree that you could subtract the midwife. Because again, not everybody needs the midwife. Incredible. Rav Papa, Rav Huna Ber Rav Yoshua, Avod Uvda Kavase Rav Nachman B'Shishim. Rav Papa and Rav Huna Ber Rav Yoshua, they passed like Rav Nachman, and therefore when assessing damages, they looked at the produce, they looked at the parcel of land, but they looked at it as if it happened on a parcel of land 60 times larger. And that's how they assess damages. Lishna Achrina, the other possibilities, Rav Papa, Rav Huna Ber Rav Yoshua, Samu Dikla, Agov Katina Da'ara. So I will say it's the same halacha, I'll just phrase a little bit differently, that when they assess damages, they look at the palm tree on a small parcel of land. Now, small parcel of land, ultimately, again, means that halacha l'maisa was 60 times larger, or 60 palm trees. The hilchasa kavase de rapapa, v'rafun ber Yeshua bedikla darama, the hilchasa kavase de reish kalusa bedikla parsa. And the halacha ultimately follows Rapapa and Rafuna in the case of an Aramean date tree, and the halacha follows Reish Kalusa in the case of a Persian palm tree. Rashi points out over here, Dikla Parsa Chashav Huma'od V'nishim B'fnei Atzma. Apparently, again, the dates of the Persian palm tree were much more expensive, and therefore, again, so damage is done to the produce was ultimately, again, valued on its own. Now, I will say, let's just talk about halacha l'maaseh for just a moment, because we're going to kind of venture into a little bit of a different sugya. So I will say, here's the way the Rambam paskins. The Rambam paskins in Hilchos Niskei Mammon, Perek Dalid, Halacha Yud Dalid, Achla Peiros Kimurin, Shein Tzrichen Lekarka. So I will say, the Rambam divides this up between essentially Bosar, which is fully matured produce, which no longer needs the ground, it no longer needs to be nourished from the ground, versus produce which still requires the ground. So if you have produce that essentially is fully matured, ready to be harvested, mishalim demei peros gimurin b'shaveim, imsa demei sa, imsasayim demei sasayim. Now I'm jumping out of the boat because we're not fully finished yet, but you're going to see in just a moment, we're kind of jumping to, I probably should wait. Let me wait. Let me wait a little bit. Okay, let me get to the next Mishnah, and then we'll do the Rambam, because there's still more. We're just going to go on a great story detour over here. Eliezer Zira, on the days. Havasayim Mesani Uchmi, Vikai B'Shuka Denarda. This man, Eliezer Zira, was wearing black shoes. He was wearing black shoes, and he was walking in the Shuk of Narda. Okay, so we'll say, so what happened? So the members of the household of the Reish Galusa came upon him. He said to him, what's up with your shoes? As well said, it was not common for people to wear black shoes. Why are you wearing black shoes? He said, I wear black shoes as a sign of mourning for Yerushalayim. Incredible. We'll say, listen to the exchange. Amrulei, at chashivas le'itzabuli ayirushalayim. You're not chashav enough, right? Are you chashav enough? Are you important enough to mourn for Yerushalayim? Savar yuarahavi. They looked at him as a bal gaiva, asiyah v'chavshua, and they incarcerated him. They put him in jail. I will say, can you imagine if gaiva was a crime, right? Can you imagine if gaiva was a crime? Mamish, there wouldn't be enough space, right? There wouldn't be enough space. So I'll say, so this Gemara is incredible in general, right? So this guy, Eliezer Zira, is wearing black shoes as a sign of mourning for Yerushalayim. The Reish Galusa gets in touch or sees him, says, who are you? Who are you to mourn over Yerushalayim? Ultimately, again, you're a Bal Gaiva. You're a Bal Gaiva. So the Gemara says, Amr Lahu. So listen to this. Eliezer, Zira says to them, Gavra Rabba Ana. I promise I'm a great man. I'm a great man. And I was saying that wasn't Gaiva. He was trying to explain that he had a right, so to speak, to mourn publicly for Yerushalayim. Shabbos says, so just before we go on, the sons of in the Shalos Achulas Direi Yatziv asked, what is going on over here? I don't understand why the Gemara makes it sound like only a Gavra Rabba, only a great man, is entitled to publicly mourn for Yerushalayim. So what's the pshat with that? First of all, we all have an obligation to mourn for Yerushalayim. So obviously, what they're talking about over here is a public mourning in a way that's not normally done. Right? So this act of wearing black shoes, which was a statement that I am a person who consistently mourns for Yerushalayim. So apparently that's what the Reish Galusa felt Eliezer Katina didn't have the right to do. But why can't anyone do that? Why is the mourning for Yerushalayim something that is the domain of great people? And the Chazon McGrath says something so beautiful. He explains something fascinating. He says, because only great people understand what it is that we're mourning. So the Rebbe says there are two components to mourning for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim. He says there's an element where we mourn for ourselves, what we lack. I lack a Beis HaMikdash, right? So it's about me. It's about me. The tzaddik understands that is not the essence of mourning for Yerushalayim. The essence of mourning for Yerushalayim is the tsar of the Shechina, is the pain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the pain of the Ribono Shel Olam. The common man doesn't feel the tsar of the Shechina. The common man, I feel my own pain. The tzaddik is able to feel the pain of Shechina v'galusa. The Shiurim will say, it's hard for us to wrap our head around these things, obviously, because it's hard for us to, in general, of course, even though it's anthropomorphic, right? The Shechina, so to speak, doesn't experience emotion. It's just like the Shechina doesn't have a yad chazaka. These are all anthropomorphic things. But Lamai said there is something that is different about the Ribono Shel Olam when the Beis HaMikdash is not in existence. The Ribono Shel Olam, so to speak, suffers when Yerushalayim is not intact, when Klal Yisrael is not as it should be. And only the tzaddik is able to tap into that frequency. So therefore, again, all of us have an obligation to mourn Yerushalayim on our own end, right? I know that as an individual, I am not complete. I am not whole. My family's not intact. My life is not intact. Nothing is as it should be without my Beis HaMikdash, without a rebuilt Yerushalayim. Do I feel the tzara of the Shechina? I am not personally. I would say, I think that for many of us, that the first time I think in our lives that maybe we actually felt began to feel the tzar of the Shekhinah was on Simchas Torah, was on October 7th. The Chil Hashem, the desecration of the Ribono Shel Olam's name, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol and Am Yisroel was trampled upon on that day. I think for the first time we felt in our acute and overwhelming and heartbreaking and at the beginning paralyzing pain was the tzar of the Shekhinah as well. We felt that. We felt the Chil Hashem, the mamash, the desecration of the Ribono Shel Olam that unfolded on that day. So in any event, Eliezer Zira is walking around a public statement. The Reish Galusi says, one second. Everyone is obligated to mourn Yerushalayim. I'll say, where do we mourn Yerushalayim? Where do we mourn Yerushalayim? Right? No. You mourn Yerushalayim every single day in your home, right? There's an obligation to leave an amma by amma, right? A square, unfinished in your home, right? We don't go ahead and bring out all of our finery to our table, right? There are things that we do in our lives, in our personal lives, that ultimately go ahead and show that we are mourning Yerushalayim. But in terms of, let's say, like a public display, right, in the shuk, in the marketplace, so and in a different, strange kind of way, so that's not the purview of regular people, that's the purview of great people. So they felt that Eliezer Ketina was being ultimately, again, an arrogant person. We'll say, I just point out, by the way, just as an aside, Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva where he writes, somebody asked him, there's a din of an amma by amma. You're supposed to leave a one amma by one amma space in your home unfinished. In Eretz Yisrael, you see this all the time. In Chutz La'aretz, you see it much less. There's a discussion why that is. Someone asked Rav Moshe, am I allowed to paint a square black? Right, the minhag is to leave it unfinished. Can you go ahead and paint a black square, zechus l'churban? Rav Moshe Paskin, yes, based on the Gemara. Based on the Gemara, because you see from this Gemara that what? That black, we see from other Gemaras as well, that black is the color of Avelos, right? So he said the ability to paint the black square. Okay, anyways, let's go back to it. So Gemara says, so Eliezer Ketina says, I'm a great man. So what happened? Amrulei mina yadinan. So he said to Eliezer Ketina, like, do you have like a card or something? How do we know that you're a great guy? Like, he's like, like a greatest Tam Chacham T-shirt. Like, what do you have, right? How could we exactly see your credentials? So he said, he actually gave him a good idea. He said, Amrulahu, asun ba'o minai milsa, ana ibai minai chum milsa. Listen, here's the deal. Either you ask me a question, or I'll ask you a question. Okay? Amrulei boy at. So they said to him, well, you know what, Eliezer, you ask us a question. Amrullahu, Hayman de katz kufra my mishalim. If someone went ahead, ultimately again, and went and cut down, right, not yet developed grapes. Or dates, I should say. Not yet developed dates. So I will say, what's the halacha? My mishalim. I will say, I'll just point out to you something so beautiful over here. So the Klezmer goes on, he says, why was this the question that he asked them? Right? Why out of all the questions could he ask them? I will say, what do we lack most by not having a Beis HaMikdash? What do we lack most? The absence of a Beis HaMikdash prevents us from complete self-actualization. I can't be the complete me. We, Klal Yisrael, cannot be the best version of ourselves without a Beis HaMikdash. I will say, we're like that almost developed cluster. We're sitting on the vine. We're not fully developed. We're great. We're beautiful. We're holy. We're so incredible. But Lamaisa, not fully self-actualized. So again, remember, they incarcerated him. Why? Because they thought he was being a Balgaiva because he was publicly mourning over the Beis HaMikdash. So they say, okay, ask us a question. And the question that he asks them is inherently tied to Israel. Do you know why I mourn the Beis HaMikdash publicly each and every day with my black shoes? Because the absence of the Beis HaMikdash keeps us like that underdeveloped cluster on the vine. We're so beautiful, so great, but yet we can't reach that finish line without our beautiful Beis HaMikdash. Incredible. So in any event, what's the halacha? How much do you pay? Samrulei, Mishalim Dnei Kufra. So they said to him, what do you mean? You pay for the value of a cluster. Whatever a cluster is worth, that's what you pay. But how can you say that one day, this kufra is going to become fully developed dates? So how can you make the damager just pay for underdeveloped dates? When at the end of the day, the underdeveloped dates one day come into a full cluster. You're depriving them of a cluster. They said, you're right, you know what? You should pay the value of completely developed dates. Amr lahu. So Eliezer says to him, but that's not what he damaged. He didn't damage complete days. Amr le emulan. So we'll say, you ever have a conversation with someone like this, right? Yeah, they ask you a question, you give them an answer, they refute the answer. Okay, so what is the answer, right? So they get fed up with it. So what is the answer? So Amr lahu b'shishin. So he said to them, how do you evaluate it? B'shishin. Oh, Rabbi say, you look at what was damaged, you look at it in a field 60 times, or in a produce 60 times more, and you evaluate damages based on that. Amr lahu, man amr kabasech. So he said, Eliezer, who holds like you? Amr lahu ha Shmuel, chai ubeistino kayu. Shmuel. You don't have to rely on my word. Shmuel's alive, his Beis Din is operating. I'll say first white line, and this is how they paskin. Shadju kamei de Shmuel. Sure enough, they sent it before Shmuel. Amr lahu shapir k'amr lahu b'shishim v'shavkua. Shmuel said, "You're right. That's how he assessed damages with looking at the value, the unit of damage times 60, and ultimately, again, that's how we assess damages." And they let him go. Beautiful story. B'shimon Omer. So both say, so therefore, it sounds like what the Gemara is kind of leaving off over here, though we'll have to see what's halacha l'maaseh or not. That again, it seems like we're adapting this shishim model, but again, I both say, hold on, we're not finished. One more piece. Rabbi Shimon Omer achla peros kiun. So remember again, we had a machlokes in Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon said that if you eat complete produce, right, fully mature produce, damages is assessed just based on the value of the produce, independent of the land. Independent of the land. We don't look at the land, rather we only look ultimately against the value of the produce. So my time, what's Rabbi Shimon's logic? So my time, who Damar says, Hadam Rachmana ubir b'stei acher. So the pasuk says, ultimately again, you cause damage in another field. Melamed sheshamin al gava soda. We'll say that teaches us that when we assess damages, we look at the value of the produce as part of the field. Now we'll say, remember again, what's that model? Of sheshamin al gava soda? What's that model? That model is, we look at the value of the field before the damage occurred. With the produce, we look at the value of the field after the damage occurred, and that difference, that's damages. So when is that so? Hanimili midi disarach l'sada. That's talking about produce which requires the field. However, hani kevin lo tzrich l'sadi. Rabbi say this produce which is now fully mature, ultimately again doesn't require the field anymore, and therefore again its damages should not be assessed together with the field. Am Rafuna bar Chia, Am Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Ava, Am Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Ava, Don Rav ki Rabbi Meir, Upasek Hilchosek Rabbi Shimon. So this is very interesting. This will have to conclude. So the Gemara says, Rav paskined, or he paskined halacha. Or I should say, he adjudicated a case in accordance with Rabbi Meir, and he paskined halacha like Rabbi Shimon. How so? Dan Rav Kirav Meir. So let's remember again, Rav Meir was the earliest, the Tanakh in the Mishnah. So the Sanya, Chas of the Rishon V'lo Chas Malo. So we'll say totally unrelated case, except the concept is the same. Listen to this. We'll say, let's say Ruvain is married to Rachel. It's been a while since we've had Ruvain and Rachel together, right? So Ruvain is married to Rachel, and now what happens? We'll say, you know that when a man has property, all of his property is encumbered to the ksuva. So what happens? Now Ruvain goes ahead and sells a piece of property. Kasav Larishon, he writes a document giving over the property to another party. V'lo chasmalo. His wife did not sign on to that transaction. L'sheni v'chasmalo. Now we'll say now is a second parcel of property. He also wants to sell that off, has a shtar. And to the second one, his wife signs off on the transaction. So we'll say, so listen to this. So what's talacha? Avda ksuvas d'Remeir. Meir says she lost her ksuva. Now, why did she lose her ksuva? Take a look at Rashi. Avda ksuvas. So v'lo matis lomar nachas ruach asisi lebayli. De'im kein havilei avid l'rishon elavadei gamra umakmi. Both listen to this. She can't claim afterwards, no, I didn't really mean to give up my ksuva. Now I will say, here's the issue. After Reuben sells off the second parcel land, he has no more land. So I will say, now let's say upon death or divorce, she wants to go and collect her ksuva. Rabbi Meir says she lost her ksuva. Why? Because they're both saying, what's the only claim she could have in this situation? Only claim she could have is, I wanted to be an agreeable wife. I want to support my husband in all his endeavors. He wants to go out and sell property. He wants to be a macher in real estate. I want to help him out, make him feel good. But I never really meant to give up my claim for my ksuva. Now, here's the problem. Rabbi Meir will say, if that was true, she should have signed on to the first document as well. The fact that she did not sign on to the first document indicates to us that the following happened, right? Or like Suba Forensics is like this. She didn't sign on to the first document. Why? Why? Because she figured, you know what? There's still field number 2 for me to collect my ksuba. But then when she does sign on to field number 2, Rabbi said, then what? That is her actively giving up her rights to her ksuba, and therefore she's lost the ksuba. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Huda says, no, Yechola Luhi Shetomar Nachas Ruach Asisi Labayli. No, not true. She could ultimately go ahead and claim, even though Rabbi said she didn't sign on number 1, she signed on number 2. I was only doing it to be nice to my husband. Ma lochem alai. What do you want from me? What do you want from me? I will say, so therefore, again, I will say, ultimately, in this case, Rav paskin like Rabbi Meir, and in this case, halacha l'maisa, she no longer has a ksuba. Now, again, I will say, I just want to point out something interesting. Had she signed on to both documents and then made the claim, nachas ruach asisi labayil, I was just trying to make my husband happy, we would believe her. We'd believe her. But now that she didn't sign on to number 1, she did sign on to number 2, we do not believe that claim. She's lost her ksuba. So I will say that's how Rav paskin Rabbi Meir in that case. And I will say, now watch this. And ultimately, again, Rav also passes Rabbi Shimon. I will say, what does Rabbi Shimon hold? It's Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon holds that when you have fully mature produce, that damage was done to it, we evaluate damages just the value that produce could catch on the open market, independent of the land. Hy'd, the son of Rabbi Shimon Omer, Achula Peiros Kimurin, Mishalemes Peiros Kimurin. Im sa'ah, im sasayim, sasayim. Rabbi Shimon says that Allah L'maiseh, if you consumed or destroyed fully mature produce, we evaluate the damages based on the value of that produce, just based on that value, and not with the land. And I will say that is how Rav Paskin. I will say quickly in the last minute we have, now we can come to the Rambam. So I will say, so the Rambam Paskin that tells the Rambam Paskins like Rabbi Shimon. Or like Rav, who passes like Rabbi Shimon. What did Rabbi Shimon say? So I will say, Rambam Paskins, Hilchos Niske, Mo, and Parak Tal, Alochi Yadalid, Achla Peiros Kimurin, Shein Tzrichen Lekarka, Meshalim Dimei Peiros Kimurin, B'Sheveyan, Im Sa'as Dimei Sa, Im Sasayim Dimei Sa. So I will say, that's how you paskin. If you damage fully mature produce, what's the definition of fully mature produce? What's the definition of fully mature produce? Definition? It no longer needs the land. If the produce, now I will say, what if it's still attached? We don't care if it's attached. What we look at is it fully mature or not? If it's fully mature and that it wouldn't technically need the land, whether it's attached or detached makes no difference. How do you assess damages? Based on the value of that produce. And based on the value of the produce, we look. Let's say you damage a sa'ah of produce. How much would a sa'ah of produce cost? That's it. That's what we assess damages. Harush achla peros dekel echad. V'chein aloke peros dekel chavero. Imachal supposed to listen to this. So then the Rambam Paskins, what about all other produce? What about all the produce that's damaged? The Rambam adopts the Shishim model. He adopts the Shishim model. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, for example, just to give an illustration, so if you were to damage, let's say, dates on a palm tree, now the Rambam is mechalik between different types of palm trees, but we're not going to get into that. If you were to damage dates on a palm tree, what we look at is, we don't look at the damage done on one tree. We imagine for a moment, what if it was a grove? I don't know if grove is the right term, but you understand. Right? It was a grove of 60 palm trees, right? And you did this type of damage on one of the trees. What would the value of that damage be? So again, fully formed produce, we assess damages based on the value of the produce itself. Not fully formed produce, we adopt the Shishim model, so we look at the unit of damage, right? Or the unit that was damaged, multiply it by 60, and then again, imagine now the damage done in that context. What is that value? And that's how we assess damages. Rabosai, shkoyach. All right, Gavran Zoom, have a great day, everyone.